During the trust meeting, my aunt sniped. Charity cases don't inherit. I activated the contingency clause, redirecting funds to worthy causes instead. I, 32M, sat in that mahogany-paneled conference room, the leather chair cold beneath me, watching my aunt's face twist into something ugly as the estate attorney shuffled his papers. The air conditioning hummed overhead, but I was sweating through my shirt. My grandfather had been dead for 3 weeks, and already the vultures were circling. My aunt had flown in from California the moment she heard about the stroke. She'd brought her husband and their 2 adult kids, none of whom had visited Grandpa in the 5 years he'd been declining. I'd been the one making the twice-daily trips to his house, helping him with medications, cooking meals he could barely eat, sitting with him through the lonely evenings while everyone else had better things to do. My parents had passed when I was 19 in a car accident, and Grandpa had taken me in without hesitation. He'd paid for my college, helped me through the grief, treated me like his own son instead of the orphaned grandson who'd become an unexpected burden. The attorney cleared his throat and explained he was going to read the will. My aunt leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. Her husband drummed his fingers on the table. Their kids were glued to their phones, barely paying attention. My uncle and his family sat across from me, equally eager. I was the youngest person in that room by almost 20 years, and I could feel their eyes on me, calculating, dismissing. The will was straightforward at first. Various cousins got specific items, heirlooms, some stocks. The real estate holdings were to be divided among the surviving children with some stipulations about maintenance costs. Then the attorney got to the trust fund, the bulk of Grandpa's liquid assets, nearly $4 million he'd built through careful investing over 6 decades. I heard my name, and my aunt's spine went rigid. The attorney explained that I was designated as the primary beneficiary of the trust, with monthly disbursements starting immediately and full access at age 35. There were conditions about using the funds responsibly, clauses about education and business investments, safeguards against squandering. But the message was clear. Grandpa had left me the lion's share. My aunt's chair scraped against the floor as she stood up. Her face had gone red, that angry flush creeping up her neck. She turned to me, and I saw pure hatred in her eyes. She told me this was absurd, that I had clearly manipulated a sick old man. Her voice kept rising, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. She said I'd isolated him from his real family, poisoned his mind against his own children. I sat there taking it, my hands gripping the chair arms. The attorney tried to interject, but she wasn't done. She pointed at me and said that charity cases don't inherit, that I wasn't real family, that Grandpa had just felt sorry for me after my parents died. She said the money should go to his actual children, not some orphan he'd taken pity on. The room went silent. My uncle looked uncomfortable, but didn't defend me. His wife stared at her lap. My cousins had finally looked up from their phones, sensing drama. I felt something cold settle in my chest, and my hands stopped shaking. The grief I'd been carrying for 3 weeks crystallized into something harder. I asked the attorney if we could discuss the contingency clause. My aunt demanded to know what I was talking about. The attorney looked at me with something like respect and pulled out a separate document. He explained that Grandpa had included a specific provision activated only under certain circumstances. If I felt the family had treated me with disrespect or cruelty related to the inheritance, I had the unilateral right to redirect the trust funds to designated charitable organizations instead. My aunt's face went white. She started backtracking immediately, saying she was just upset that grief made people say things they didn't mean. Her voice had lost its edge, turned pleading. She tried to laugh it off, said we were all family, that we should work together. I told the attorney I wanted to activate the clause. My voice came out steady, calm. My aunt grabbed my arm, her nails digging in, begging me to reconsider. Her husband stood up, trying to reason with me, saying we should all take a breath and revisit this later. I pulled my arm away and repeated that I wanted the contingency clause activated immediately. The attorney nodded and explained the process. It would take about 2 weeks to finalize, during which time I could still reverse the decision. But once the 14-day period elapsed, the trust would be irrevocably transferred to the designated charities. He read the list: cancer research, the local children's hospital, a scholarship fund for orphan students, veteran services, and the senior center where Grandpa had volunteered for 20 years. My aunt collapsed back into her chair. Her daughter started crying, saying something about how she'd been counting on help with her student loans. My uncle tried one more time, suggesting we could contest the will, but the attorney shut that down quickly. He said Grandpa had been evaluated by 2 independent physicians in the months before his death and found to be of sound mind. The will was airtight. I stood up and told them I'd see myself out. My aunt called after me, her voice breaking, but I didn't turn around. I walked through those oak doors and down the marble hallway, my footsteps echoing. I got to my car, an old Honda I'd been nursing along for 8 years, and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. The 2 weeks that followed were brutal. My phone never stopped ringing. My aunt left dozens of voicemails, each one cycling through anger, grief, and desperate bargaining. She tried saying she'd been on medication that made her emotional. She claimed she didn't mean any of it, that she loved me like her own son. My uncle took a different approach, trying to appeal to logic and family unity. He suggested I could keep a portion and donate the rest, find a middle ground. My cousins sent text messages ranging from hostile to pathetically manipulative. I blocked most of them and focused on work. I was a junior project manager at a construction firm, still climbing the ladder, living in a modest apartment in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The money would have changed everything. I could have paid off my student loans, bought a house, started my own company like I'd always dreamed. The weight of what I was giving up hit me at strange moments, lying awake at 3 in the morning or standing in the grocery store deciding between name brand and generic. But every time I wavered, I remembered my aunt's face, the contempt in her voice. Charity case, not real family. I thought about all the times none of them had visited, all the holidays I'd spent alone with Grandpa while they were too busy. I thought about how he'd told me I was the son he wished he'd had, how proud he was of the man I'd become. On day 13, my aunt showed up at my apartment. I didn't know how she got my address, but there she was at 8 in the evening, mascara running, hair a mess. She'd driven 2 hours from her hotel. She stood in my doorway and said she was sorry, really sorry, that she'd been awful and cruel. She said she knew she didn't deserve forgiveness, but she was begging me anyway. Behind the tears, though, I could see the calculation in her eyes, the same look she'd had in the conference room when the will was being read. I told her the deadline was tomorrow and I wasn't changing my mind. She grabbed my hands, squeezed them so hard it hurt, and said I was throwing away my future out of spite. She asked if that's what Grandpa would have wanted. I told her that Grandpa had included the clause specifically because he knew his family, knew how they'd react, knew they'd show their true colors when money was involved. He'd given me a choice, and I was making it. She left, and I never saw her again. The next afternoon, I met with the attorney and signed the final paperwork. The trust funds were transferred that week. Cancer research got $1 million. The Children's Hospital got $1 million. The Scholarship Fund got $1 million. Veterans Services got $500,000. The Senior Center got $500,000. The attorney told me the organizations were overwhelmed with gratitude, that the donations would change countless lives. Update 1. 6 months after the trust transfer, I received a letter from the Scholarship Fund. They'd named it after my grandfather and wanted me to attend the first award ceremony. I took the day off work and drove to the university where Grandpa had gotten his engineering degree 70 years ago. The ceremony was in a small auditorium, maybe 50 people in attendance. They gave out 5 scholarships that year to students who'd lost parents, kids who were working 2 jobs while maintaining perfect grades, survivors who refused to let tragedy define them. I sat in the audience watching them receive their awards, seeing the relief and hope on their faces, and something inside me finally unclenched. A girl who reminded me of myself at 19 came up afterward and thanked me. She said the scholarship meant she could quit her overnight stocking job and focus on her engineering classes. She had tears streaming down her face. My aunt's family had stopped contacting me entirely. I heard through distant relatives that she and her husband were fine financially, just angry they hadn't gotten the windfall they'd expected. My uncle had apparently told people I was vindictive and spiteful, but he didn't push it too hard. The general consensus among the extended family seemed to be that my aunt had screwed up badly and I'd had every right to do what I did. Work had gotten better too. I'd been promoted to senior project manager with a significant raise. I was saving money steadily, dating someone I really liked, making plans for a future I was building myself. The apartment wasn't so bad. I'd started cooking more, like Grandpa had taught me, and found I enjoyed it. Life felt smaller than it might have been with $4 million, but it felt honest, earned mine. Update 2. A year and a half after everything happened, the Children's Hospital invited me to tour the new cancer treatment wing my donation had helped fund. They'd combined my grandfather's contribution with other donations and grants to build a state-of-the-art facility. I walked through rooms filled with equipment that would save lives, met doctors and nurses who were genuinely grateful, saw kids playing in a beautiful recreation area designed to feel less like a hospital and more like home. The hospital director told me they estimated the wing would serve over 200 pediatric cancer patients annually. She showed me a plaque on the wall with my grandfather's name, listing him as a founding donor. Standing there, reading his name, I finally cried for him properly. Not the numb, shocked tears from the funeral, but real grief mixed with pride. I started volunteering there monthly. Nothing major, just reading to kids or helping with art projects. It connected me to something larger than my own resentment and loss. The money was gone, irrevocably spent on people who needed it more than I did, and I discovered I didn't regret it. Not even on the hard days when my car broke down or my rent went up. My girlfriend had become my fiancée. She'd known the whole story from the beginning, and she'd told me she fell in love with me partly because of the choice I made. We were planning a small wedding, saving up slowly. Her family had embraced me completely, and her father told me my grandfather would have been proud. I was starting to believe him. I ran into my uncle once at a restaurant. He'd nodded awkwardly, and we'd had a brief, uncomfortable conversation. He said my aunt had never gotten over it, that she blamed me for ruining her retirement plans. I told him I hoped he was doing well and left it at that. There was nothing more to say. The family was fractured, probably permanently, but I'd made my peace with that. Update 3. 3 years after the trust meeting, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from one of the scholarship recipients, the engineering student I'd met at that first ceremony. She'd graduated summa cum laude and gotten a job at a major tech company. She wrote that the scholarship had changed her life trajectory, that she'd been about to drop out before receiving it. She'd gotten married, bought a house, and was paying it forward by mentoring other orphan students. She included a photo of herself in her cap and gown, holding her diploma, her smile radiant. I kept that letter in my desk drawer and pulled it out whenever I wondered if I'd made the right choice. The answer was always the same. My grandfather had given me more than money. He'd given me the chance to prove what kind of man I was when faced with cruelty and greed. He'd trusted me to make the hard choice, the right choice, even when it cost me everything. I never inherited that $4 million. I drove the same aging Honda, lived in the same modest apartment for another year before finally saving enough for a down payment on a small house. I built my life slowly, deliberately, without shortcuts or windfalls. And when my son was born last month, I held him in the hospital room and thought about legacy, about what we passed down beyond money and property. My aunt sent a card when she heard about the baby, a generic congratulations with no personal message. I filed it away without responding. Some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. The family that mattered, the family I was building with my wife and creating with our son, was enough. The last time I visited Grandpa's grave, I told him about everything, about the scholarship students and the hospital wing and the lives changed by his money. I told him about my son, about how I hoped to be half the man he'd been. And sitting there in the quiet cemetery, I felt certain he'd known exactly what he was doing when he wrote that contingency clause. He'd known his daughter would show her true nature, and he'd given me the power to make it right. Charity case. I'd worn that insult like armor for 3 years, let it fuel me through the hard times. But sitting there with fresh flowers on his headstone and my son's name chosen partially in his honor, I realized I'd never been a charity case at all. I'd been loved unconditionally by a man who saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself. And that inheritance, the one that mattered, could never be redirected or spent or split among greedy relatives. It was mine forever, and I was passing it on. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.